The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this free webinar, and I wanted to share with you some interesting research, which I think you'll find very interesting, and certainly it can relate very much to your team. So welcome, everyone. I'm hoping I'm coming across loud and clear. But just to give you an indication, if you're unfamiliar with this platform, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see a little box, question box, and if you open that up, at any stage in these next 30 minutes that you've got a question or even a comment or observation, that's the place to put it. And once you've put it in there, I get to see it, no one else does, and of course I'll address it the moment I see it. So that gives you a vehicle to question me or perhaps add to the discussion this morning. So let's get underway. And the other thing I'd say to you that you'll be, because you've taken the time to be involved in this, you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this presentation. So sometime today or tomorrow, that'll be in your inbox. All right, so let's get underway and have a look at these three key elements for productive working relationships in teams. Now, as I mentioned, this comes from research, and it's very interesting research, and it's got major implications for team leaders and how they can develop that high-performing team that everybody wants to develop in their own way, in their own organisations. All right, so three things I wanted to cover basically today. I wanted to consider the concept of task and relationship, and all teamwork is a mix of task and relationship. And I want to just talk a little bit about that because that sets it up very nicely for the rest of the presentation. I then want to share with you this research that looks at these three elements and give you a chance to consider those. We don't have time to talk too much about the implications of that, but certainly you'll get a chance to do that if you choose to join me in an online course that I'll talk about towards the end of the program. This is a free online course, and I'll talk a little bit about that further today. And then the final thing, of course, is I'll talk about these three elements and really unpack them and define them and give you an opportunity to think about them. So that's what we're doing in the short session that we've got here today. All right, so let's get underway. Now, the first concept that I really wanted to talk about today with you is this concept of task and relationship. So when teams are working effectively, there's two things that are happening, and these things are pretty much in balance. Obviously, any team set up to complete a task or tasks. Now, those tasks are usually, if it's a commercial organisation, for example, those tasks would be, providing the goods or services that the customer wants. This is basically the rationale for why the team has been set up in the first place. But all the while we're trying to actually achieve those tasks and do those tasks, there are a lot of relationships in a team that need to be maintained. So if you don't get the balance right, if there's too much focus on task and not enough on relationship, then what happens is the task suffers. And if there's too much focus on relationships and not enough focus on the tasks, then again, of course, although everyone might be happy campers, the tasks don't get done. So it's a perennial challenge for any team leader to be able to straddle this concept of task versus relationship. Now, a lot of things, of course, a lot of projects that you are involved in are both a mix of task and relationship because things aren't done in a vacuum. So obviously, there are many things where there's a combination of those two things at play. So the concept of task and relationship is critically important. Now, we do know from the research that it is the relationship dimension of teams that makes the difference. So if you've got two teams of equal competence, you've got two teams who basically have the same skill level in terms of producing the goods or services or whatever the team's there for, but one team has well-developed relationships within the team, working relationships I'm talking about, and the other team doesn't, well, it's certainly likely that the team that has the well-developed relationships will be the high-performing team, and the one that is equally skilled in the task is probably going to be a low-performing team. So just a concept to keep in mind as we go through this morning's presentation. So let's just actually build that up a little bit and actually look at it in a bit more detail. So we've got here, you can see that the needs in terms of the balancing act is that obviously there is a task, and I'll just build that up a little bit. Obviously the task is what you do in your team. That is your reason or rationale for why the team has been formed. This is the projects or activities that you do in order to achieve whatever it is that the organisation expects you to do. But also you'll note that there are two relationship dimensions or subsets now. Of course, I talked about task and relationship, but down the bottom you can see that there is a need for a team leader to cater for the individual needs and interests and motivations of each member of the team. So what this implies, of course, is the team leader needs to have good, productive working relationships with each member of the team. Now, as we both know, that's not always the case. Excuse me, but whatever the leader can do to build a more productive working relationship with each individual is critically important. So that's one of the subsets of the relationship dimension. Now, the other dimension, which is a relationship dimension, is the team dimension. And that is to make sure, of course, that there is harmony in the team and there's balance and collaboration. And what that means is that everyone feels that they're part of the team, that they're given an opportunity to speak up in team meetings, they're given the chance to say their piece, and that is another aspect or chunk of the relationship part of teams. Now, a lot of this, of course, is done in the regular meetings that you run with your team. And I always think that the best way to run a team meeting is always to have 50% reporting, because obviously you need some reporting on the task, and 50% pretty much collaborating and discussing and coming to consensus and agreement. What I call in my book, Winning Teams, my new book, what I call is the notion of shared leadership. So I just wanted to sort of set that up before we start looking at the research and understand it a little bit further, where these three elements fit in. These three elements fit in very much around the individual and team subsets of the relationship dimension. Now, there are lots and lots of models out there that are pretty much predicated on the idea of task versus relationship, and one of the most famous models is Blake's model, which he called the managerial grid, and you can see it on your page there now on your screen. And if we just have a look at that, you can see there that basically over here you've got concern for people, high, concern from people, low, and down the bottom you've got concern for production, low and high. So we've basically got two dimensions. And then what this does is break it up into a typical 2x2 matrix. So if we actually have a look at perhaps this dimension here, or this quadrant, you'll notice that we call, or what Blake calls, the impoverished leader. The impoverished leader is someone that neither gives much attention to the people, nor do they give much attention to production. So I'd probably suggest that these are reluctant team leaders. They've been put in place because of their excellent technical skills, but at the end of the day, they're reluctant to exercise their leadership in the team, and so that's why we call it an impoverished form. Now, if you've got a leader who is too concerned with people over production, then what you have, according to Blake, is the country club leader. And what that basically means in plain English, I guess, is that people enjoy coming to work and they enjoy the interaction with other people. And that's wonderful. But what it also means is, of course, that very little gets done. And so obviously in that sense, it's not ideal from a team leader point of view because they've got an imbalance of people over tasks. Now, if we go over here to the this one here over in the bottom right-hand corner, this leader is a task leader. That is, they have a huge emphasis on production and to a point where perhaps they don't or they neglect the needs of individuals. So this is great in an emergency. So for example, you know, we've all witnessed or perhaps been touched by the bushfires in Australia, and obviously the emergency services and the fireys and all the rest of it have, because of the nature of the urgency, have been very task focused. So there is a time and a place to be very task focused. There is really very little time to be making sure that the relationship dimension is working. But in those emergency situations, it's extremely important to be task focused. And then over here in the last quadrant, you've got the team management, which is basically, you might argue, is the best form because it's a concern for people and a concern for production, which is both high. But I would argue that really where you want to be positioned is in the middle, because if you're positioned in the middle, then you can fluctuate into all four quadrants depending, of course, on what's required at the time. So leaders have got to be flexible when they actually create this balance between task and relationship. And so I'd suggest that a 5-5 is probably where a leader should position themselves. And if it's, you know, if we've got deadline driven, urgent tasks that need to be done, the task leader is probably the better way to go. If we're forming a new team, for example, the country club aspect might be really important just to build some harmony and esprit de corps in the team. If the team is highly capable and individuals are very competent and highly skilled, then it might be possible that the team leader can step back and allow the team to do what they're doing. And of course, you know, in the team management approach, this can be considered to be, you know, a balance between the two and so forth. So I hope that model's helped you a little bit just to put some context around what we're talking about. Now, what I want to do now is share with you the research, and I want to give you a little idea as to what the research says about these three dimensions. All right, so I'm looking at Pentland's research. Now, Pentland research confirmed in his research that communication plays a critical part in team success. Now, you probably didn't need to hear that, you would probably know that, but he very much confirmed that if you look at any high-performing team, whether it's in the world of sport, such as, say, the New Zealand All Blacks or whoever it might be, if you look at those teams, what usually defines them from other teams is the communication piece rather than the skill or the task piece. So Pentland has made it clear that communication is the critical differentiator between a mediocre team and a high-performing team. So the argument is that we should be spending more time in the relationship dimension than we probably do. I suspect that probably it might be 80-20, 80% task, 20% relationship. Normally when a team's formed, they might call in a consultant like myself, they run a team exercise, people get to know each other, and then they drop that, and then of course it's all task focused from there on in. And what Pentland's saying is that the communication piece is something that needs to be continued to be nurtured all the way through. Another message that came out of his research is that it's the communication patterns more than the message that makes the difference. So that's the interesting part. It's not so much what people say, but when and how they say it. So it's actually the patterns of communication rather than anything else. And what Pentland did in his research is he got some teams and got them to wear some technology for a week, and he could actually plot the communication patterns in a team. The third key point that he raises is that it's the way teams communicate in the informal settings rather than the team meeting that counts. So despite what we might think, it's actually what happens in the corridor and actually what happens between the team meetings that very much dictates the level of communication. And so, you can have wonderful team meetings, but it's the interactions between people between those team meetings that seem to be making all the difference. And if you think about it, that's very true. In most teams, if you've got a team of 5 or 6 people, it's probably likely that some of those relationships aren't ideal. And so therefore you've got people in the team who don't necessarily communicate well with each other on an informal basis. And that, of course, is going to impact on the quality of team success. Another point that came out of his research is that he suggests, and this is a quote from him, the best predictors of productivity were a team's energy and engagement outside formal meetings. So that was the significant part of his research, that it's the way people communicate outside the team meetings that can make all the difference. And according to Pentland's research, energy and engagement accounts for a third of the variation in dollar terms of team productivity. So he was able to show a correlation between this interaction and team success. So you can see that if you're looking at producing a high quality team, a high performing team as we call it, then the focus, assuming of course the technical skills are there, the focus very much needs to be on the communication piece. Which does raise an interesting question for all of us, and it's the chicken and the egg situation. So what comes first? Does a high performing team promote better communication between team members, or does better communication build a high performing team? So what comes first in the process? Well, I think Pentland argues, and I certainly support it, is that the communication piece can't be taken for granted. It needs to be continually upgraded, and it needs to be continually attended to, even though we're all leading busy lives, because that ultimately will be the deal breaker or the deal maker when it comes to high performance. All right. So basically what it means is that you can have a team of highly skilled professionals that have poor communication between the team members. That's going to be problematic. It's not going to produce the results that it should be potentially with the team's capacity. So it does, I think the point I want to make here is it does seem almost absurd that how we communicate could be so much more important to success than what we communicate. It just seems to go against the grain of our conventional thinking in the workplace. And I think the reason for this is that, and certainly Pentland touches on this in his research, is that if you think, if you look at language has only been around for a relatively short period of time, but body language or non-verbal communication has been around since the dawn of time. So if you think about people sitting around a campfire who aren't necessarily, that don't have language skills, how the team or how the individuals could take their cues from other people sitting around that campfire was very much a non-verbal rather than a verbal. So therefore, we as human beings are very highly attuned to this concept of how we communicate, what sort of messages are coming through non-verbally than verbally. So it flies in the face of what we perhaps have always thought, and that is that it's always about the content of the conversation rather than the process. But it's really the process that makes all the difference. And I think that's really an important point to keep in mind when you're talking about building high-performing teams. So there are 5 key factors pretty much in team achievement. And I want to run through those with you and talk a little bit about each of those factors. And if you've got, as I said, any questions or comments, just go to the question box over on the right-hand side, click on open up and type in your message. I will pick it up immediately, and I'm more than happy to talk about that. But while you're thinking about that, let's have a look at these 5 key communication factors. Factor number 1, everyone in high-performing teams contributes equally in their casual interactions. 1 or 2 members don't monopolise conversations. Now, if you think about it, that sounds like common sense, but in practice, it's true that most teams have got a dominant personality or 2, and it may not necessarily be you as the team leader. And basically what we find in team meetings is that they tend to dominate the conversation, but also in the corridors, that is in between the team meetings, which seems to make all the difference, as Pentland points out, they also dominate the conversation. And so what that means is that there are some members of the team who perhaps are quieter than they would normally be because they're being drowned out by these dominant characters. So part of a team leader's role is to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and that people feel comfortable contributing, and that we don't have 1 or 2 people dominating the conversations both in the hall, in the corridors, or in the team meeting. So that's one of the key implications. Another one is that meaningful conversations occur in face-to-face encounters with vibrance and energy. So what Pentland found is that it is the enthusiasm and energy that's put into the communication that can make all the difference, rather than what is actually said at the time. So as you can imagine, this is one of the elements that he came up with of the 3 that I'm going to share with you shortly. The third key point is that team members communicate with one another without the need of the team leader present. So the team is autonomous in the sense that they can work things out themselves, they communicate with each other informally, and they don't necessarily feel the need to consult with their team leader all the time. Obviously, there are certain things that a team leader needs to be across, but ultimately a high-performing team is where people in the team take up the responsibility or accountability by communicating with each other and not having to rely just on the team leader. So ultimately, that can be a challenge for some team leaders who are quite dominant and perhaps, fairly autocratic in the way they go about things. But that's not going to be a recipe for success in terms of high performance. The fourth key point out of all of this is that they engage in more one-on-one conversations with each other than usual. And I'll just come back to that in a moment because we've just got a comment or a question here. The comment, Chas, you asking are the slides available? The slides will be available. You'll be sent a copy at the end of this. You'll also be sent a copy of the recording, so you can just relax. You'll get all that via email either this afternoon or tomorrow. So yes, Chas, they will be available. Just let you know that. So the fourth point there is that they engage in more one-on-one conversations. So interestingly enough, this is what Pentland found, is that when you look at a high-performing team, there is a tendency that they will go out of their way to communicate with each other far more than what a mediocre or low-performing team might otherwise do. So, one of the measures of a high-performing team is likely to be the number of one-on-one interactions that go on outside the team meeting. So that becomes very, very important. Now, obviously, if that happens, you've got a high level of trust and so forth. Number 5 is that the team members are willing to network beyond the team, and they bring back what they've learnt to the team for its benefit. Now, teams don't work in vacuums, as you know. They don't work in isolation. They work with other teams. So everyone in the team sees it as their responsibility to inform the team of what's going on in the outer world of the team. So there are 5 interesting implications of what Pentland is talking about in his particular research. So basically, here are the three elements. These three elements are the critical elements in a team. One is energy, and really energy is defined as the frequency and value of conversations between team members. So this is the number of conversations and the relevance of those conversations in the corridor between team meetings actually is critically important to team success. Engagement is defined as the distribution of energy amongst team members. In other words, what that means is that everyone in the team contributes relatively equally in these conversations, and that not one or two people completely dominate the conversation, both in the room, the meeting room, and also in the corridor. And the third element that Pentland talks about is exploration, which involves communication patterns beyond the team environment. So this is, again, in the corridors. This is also the information and relationships that are built up with other stakeholders. This is where people are asking key questions. So really, if you think about it, those three elements are critically important to any team success. But of course, as a team leader, it's not so easy to implement all of those because you're not there in the corridor all the time. So one of the things that I will do in the course that I'm going to talk about shortly is that you will learn how you might actually engage in all of those activities or elements to enhance the performance of your team. So what I wanted to do at this stage is give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have. So by all means, if you've got a question, then go ahead and do that. What I'd like to do at this stage, if I may just close that out for a minute and go to my internet. Just got a question here. What about clarity of engagement? Chas asks. Yeah, good question, Chas. What the research shows is what is more important is the frequency rather than the clarity. Now, obviously, clarity is important, and that's what you're implying, Chas, but ultimately, it really is the frequency of conversations. So we've all had cases where we've thought to ourselves, should I raise this or should I not with someone? And of course, in a high-performing team, there would be a feeling of wanting to raise it regardless of how clear I was about my ideas, whereas a mediocre and low-performing team would be thinking, oh, I better get my facts straight before I communicate, and then ultimately it might mean that they don't communicate. So it is about the frequency rather than anything else. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a heads up there. Now, what you're seeing on your screen now, if I can just finish up today, you can see that I've got a course that is available to you, which basically runs over several weeks. It's a course that looks very much at how you can implement many of these things, and you can see that there are lots and lots of ideas that we talk about and share in this course, and then you can go through in that process. Now that's free to you. If I may put it this way, if you purchase a copy of my latest book, and this is pre-ordered, so in other words, I'm offering you something today which I think you might find very valuable, and basically this is the offer. So if you pre-order a copy of Winning Teams, Applying the All Blacks Formula for your team, which is ultimately about to go to press, the book is valued at $30, and if you pre-order and you do that, you'll receive that free online course. So you get logged into that course and you complete that course, and it's basically about building highly effective teams. The value of that is about $675. So for a small investment of $30, you get enormous value. You get a copy of the book when it's published, hot off the press before anybody else. And by the time that book has arrived, you've actually delved into some of the concepts that we're going to talk about around building highly effective teams. Now, all you've got to do to take advantage of that is just send me an email, because if you send me an email, what I will do is either invoice you or explain how you can pay that $30. Once that's done, of course, you'll get a login and you can go straight into the course and do that in your own time. So it's not like, you've got to front up like, Friday today at 10 o'clock. You can do that in your own time at your own leisure, and you can interact with other people who happen to be in the same boat, that is, team leaders who are looking at developing high-performing teams. So that's the offer. So I hope you can take advantage of that. Doesn't look like we've got any other questions. So what I might do is leave that with you. So there you go, send me an email and I will sort that out for you today and give you an opportunity to log into that program. So folks, that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for giving up half an hour of your time. Hopefully you found that useful and insightful, and I look forward to receiving your email in due course. So that's about it from me. So I'll finish up there. And of course, if you've got other questions that you want me to answer, I'm more than happy to answer those if you send me an email as well. So thanks everyone. I wish you a really great weekend. And I also would say Happy New Year, belatedly, being the last day of January. And I hope 2020 is the year that the year of promise for you. Thank you to those people. Is it Kenna and Jessica? Thank you for your thank you. I appreciate that. So all the best, everyone, and look forward to hearing from you via email. Thank you and goodbye.